The Reserve Bank warns that interest rates will be rising into next year. Rio Tinto looks to end a 50-year feud to increase its iron ore output, and why banks might charge customers with homes on floodplains higher interest rates. It's Wednesday, the 19th of October, 2022. Welcome to Fear and Greed, Australia's most popular business podcast. I'm Michael Thompson, and good morning, Sean Aylmer.
Good morning, Michael.
Sean, I know you are very excited about, every Wednesday, because there is another episode out today of our new podcast, How Do They Afford That? And this is obviously as part of our partnership with Sugar Mama TV and the founder of Sugar Mama, who is Canna Campbell, a weekly podcast full of tips and hints and, of course, Sean, your favourite hacks.
Hacks.
Many hacks on making your money go further. The topic in today's episode is one that I'm sure you would actually be quite interested in, Sean, investing for your kids.
Yeah, that's a great idea. How many kids you got?
Well, that's the thing. Depends on how many kids you do have. Would change how much you have to invest for them. But it's also about inspiring them to make good decisions as well.
Yes, actually. It's funny. I have sat down with my 18, he was 18 at the time, and he started putting in, I think it was $500 every quarter into shares. And he's just held on to them. And even though the share market has come off a bit, he has actually done really well out of it. And it's just interesting watching his response to it and just learning about investing.
Yeah, it's such an interesting topic, and it's one that we go into in today's episode. So the podcast is called How Do They Afford That? The link is in today's show notes. You can find it wherever you listen to podcasts. And just thank you to the thousands of people who have listened over the last couple of weeks as we get this new podcast up and running.
Also, Michael, I just have to do a quick shout out to Finners and Millie, who wrote to me and were outraged that I didn't like Harry Potter, even more outraged that I called Snape Snake. So, Finners and Millie, I apologise.
I completely agree with Finners and Millie. That was, as I said at the time, almost unforgivable when you mentioned that on Monday's show. But
righto, moving on, please.
We will get through that. We will. Now, you've got a very interesting chat coming up today after the show, Sean, with Latika Burke, who is the correspondent for 9 newspapers in London, about really the kind of crazy times in UK politics at the moment.
Yeah, amazing. Prime Minister Liz Truss, will she keep her job? The total U-turn on tax cuts. A fascinating chat with Latika, who has been there for a few years now and really knows the politics inside out.
Yeah, she really does. The main story, though, this morning, Sean, the Reserve Bank of Australia Deputy Governor Michelle Bullock yesterday made it clear that even though the central bank lifted rates by just 25 basis points 2 weeks ago, there are still plenty more rate rises in the offing.
Ms. Bullock, who's the main internal candidate to take over from Governor Phil Lowe when he finishes in a year's time, suggested rates would rise into next year because the job of taming inflation isn't done yet. She said inflation was too high and people should be in no doubt that rates will continue to rise to ensure inflation falls back to the 2 to 3% band that the Reserve Bank targets and inflation expectations remain anchored. That's all about all of us not thinking that inflation will keep going. That was enough to revitalise the Aussie dollar, which had been depreciating against the US dollar yesterday morning before jumping back above 63 US cents following Ms. Bullock's comments. She made the point that because the Reserve Bank meets 11 times a year, that's about once a month, it has a greater opportunity to calibrate rate rises than, let's say, the US Federal Reserve, which only meets 8 times a year. That's why the market shouldn't read too much into going 25 basis points and not 50 basis points.
Well, that would have made yesterday's release of the minutes of the Reserve Bank board meeting from 2 weeks ago interesting, because this was the one where the bank lifted the cash rate by 25 basis points, not 50. I know that Michelle Bullock was saying don't pay too much attention to it, but there certainly would have been a lot of people reading those notes pretty closely.
Yeah, absolutely. The minutes say that the decision to lift 25, not 50 basis points was finely balanced, was the phrase they used, but the decision was made to hold off and assess incoming data. The minutes also say that the board wants to return inflation to the 2 to 3% range while keeping the economy on an even keel, but the path to achieving this balance is narrow and clouded in uncertainty. A bit of a mixed metaphor, that, clouded in uncertainty. Still, we get what they're saying.
Yeah, it does. I actually like the colourful language. It's quite emotive, isn't it?
That's right, from a central bank. Very impressive.
Indeed. Now, is the Deputy Governor and, therefore, the Reserve Bank worried about the falling dollar?
Well, it doesn't seem so. Ms. Bullock pointed out that while the Aussie had fallen against the greenback, it was down only slightly against a basket of other currencies, the so-called trade-weighted index. From the Reserve Bank board minutes, it appears that members expected a lower than forecast rate rise would put pressure on the dollar. All in all, though, I don't think there's too much concern about the currency.
All right. How did the local equity market go yesterday?
It's actually a very good day for the market, with the S&P ASX 200 finishing up 1.7% to 6,779 points. Now, a strong lead-in from Wall Street helped things along, and by the close, Macquarie Group had jumped more than 5%, following a strong performance from US banks. Westpac rose 2.4%, Transurban was up more than 2%, WiseTech Global, the software group, and Gold Digger Newcrest Mining both rose nearly 5%. The laggards were the energy companies. Woodside and Santos both went backwards. Hub24 led the index, gaining 10% after reporting $3 billion in net inflows for the first quarter of this financial year.
Okay, we'll be back in a moment with the rest of the day's business news. Sean, the floods in Victoria continue to cause havoc, closing schools and triggering rescues.
It's probably fortunate that at this point there hasn't been any major human casualties. There are still 5 major flood warnings out in Victoria. Yesterday there were 700 flood rescues. 80 schools in the state were closed, while 15,000 people have already applied for the $2,000 emergency payments. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese was meeting his Singaporean counterpart yesterday. Lee Hsien Loong said his country's army is available to support Australia's response to natural disasters. I thought that was actually a nice touch from the Singaporean Prime Minister.
Yes, indeed. And the federal government will reverse the Morrison government decision to recognise West Jerusalem as the capital of Israel.
Yes, I don't know whether you remember this. A few years back in 2018, the Morrison government made the move. It followed a similar move by the Donald Trump-led US back then. It was severely criticised and seen as quite provocative to the Arabic community. Now, the Australian embassy has remained in Tel Aviv, and that's where it will be. Foreign Minister Penny Wong said the Australian government remains committed to a two-state solution in which Israel and a future Palestinian state can coexist in peace and security within internationally recognised borders. But the Israeli Prime Minister yesterday attacked the decision, saying it was a response to incorrect information.
Right, now, I mentioned this one at the top of the show, Sean. Rio Tinto believes Australia's best undeveloped iron ore project is closer to fruition after striking a deal with the Wright family.
Yes, Rio and Wright Prospecting have agreed to modernise their 50-year-old joint venture and begin studies on a plan to bring Rhodes Ridge into production before 2030. Now, the deal potentially unlocks a very large and high-grade source of iron ore. According to the Financial Review, Rhodes Ridge has been at the centre of legal battles that have run pretty much since the original deal was struck back in 1972 between the Perth families that pioneered iron ore prospecting in the Pilbara region. They're the descendants of Lang Hancock and Peter Wright. Of course, Hancock Prospecting is now controlled by Australia's richest woman, Gina Rinehart. But developing Rhodes Ridge seems a big step closer today.
And it certainly sounds, Sean, like Rio is confident about the future of iron ore.
Yes, this would be a massive investment. The huge miner, though, yesterday said there would be short-term stumbles. The company said China's economy is spluttering due to COVID lockdowns and weakness in the property market. Iron ore futures fell another 3% yesterday. Interestingly, Brazilian giant Vale, which along with Rio, Fortescue and BHP make up the big 4 iron ore miners, it announced a really strong profit and strong production levels yesterday as well. Plenty of competition in iron ore, but clearly Rio is confident about the long-term outlook.
All right. How about this one? NAB boss Ross McEwen yesterday said the floods across Victoria will force the bank to rethink how they price loans in areas at risk of climate change.
There's been a fair bit of talk about banks giving green homes a discount, and now they're talking about penalising homes in flood zones. That will be enforced via the interest rates paid on home loans. National Australia Bank has already said it will provide discounts of up to 1% if borrowers could meet Green Star standards set down by the Green Building Council of Australia. Now, from the bank's point of view, it makes financial sense because it has a greater risk of losing money on residential and commercial property in flood zones and areas that will be hit by climate change. Mr. McEwen said lenders need to be more aware of the frequency of flooding and the impact it has in certain areas.
And just staying with the banks, Sean, Westpac has confirmed that it could buy a stake in payments terminal business Tyro.
That's right. Westpac said it was in preliminary discussions, saying any acquisition would strengthen the bank's small business proposition, particularly in the hospitality and healthcare sectors. Tyro last month, of course, knocked back a $660 million bid by a private equity consortium. Earlier yesterday, Tyro had actually confirmed it was in talks not just with Westpac, but, as it put it, a number of partners. Not surprisingly, Michael, Tyro's share price is up around 10% over the past couple of days.
It's been a good couple of days for Tyro. Now, Sean, the price of gold at around $1,650 an ounce isn't what it was earlier in the year, but it is still very high. But not all the local miners are able to take advantage.
Especially not St. Barbara. Now, its share price tumbled 21% yesterday after it downgraded gold production forecasts and deferred $50 million of spending on growth projects. It blamed a shortage of skills and equipment. We're hearing a bit of that, but still 21%. Wow. Its share price is now around 53 cents. In mid-2018, it was $5. What a fall from grace.
That is a big difference. Now, Sean, whenever we talk about pallets on this program,
I get very excited.
You are what I would describe as a pallet enthusiast.
Yes.
And whenever we talk about Brambles, which obviously makes pallets, just the excitement in your voice it's a little bit unusual, I'm going to say, because I don't know anyone else that gets as excited about pallets as you do. And Brambles expects growth rates to slow in 2023 as cost of living pressures start to affect consumer behaviour.
Oh, Michael, you've got to make more of this. This is really exciting stuff. Now, Bramble is such a simple product, a pallet, yet it is such a great reading on the economy. In fact, Brambles has 360 million pallets, crates and containers, and they know what's going on. That's why I get excited. Now, CEO Graham Chipchase yesterday said revenues are likely to stay strong until at least the end of this year, with Brambles able to pass on in full the rising costs of timber, fuel, labour and transport to users, but that will slow next year. In fact, there's already some slowdown in Europe, with sales in the September quarter in the region down 5%. In Australia, revenue was up about 1%. In the US, it was up 15%. Why wouldn't you love Brambles after that story?
Sean, I know you're doing renovations at your house at the moment, and I would not be surprised in 6 weeks if you're not talking about having beds made out of pallets and a table made from pallets, even some walls made out of pallets.
Back in uni days. Oh, yeah, I like that.
Yeah, and if those pallets are held up with milk crates,
yes,
then you have reached kind of maximum university level accommodation.
True.
Anyway, Treasury Wines, Sean. Now, this is something I like talking about. Treasury Wines said September quarter earnings were in line with expectations.
Yes, so the owner of Penfolds said demand for premium and luxury wines has remained consistent across all its key markets. Slow down, what slow down? We're all drinking more expensive wine. In fact, Chief Executive Tim Ford said bottles of Plonk worth more than $30 were selling well. I'd call that personally extremely expensive wine. It's kind of my price point, $30. Anything over, I have to think twice. Anything under, I'm happy to get.
Yeah, premium and luxury wine doesn't really kind of fit in with the pallets sitting on top of milk crates, does it?
No, not quite. Not quite.
Feels more like we're talking wine out of a cask there, but I'm not kind of casting any aspersions against Fruity Lexia. But anyway, Sean, I suspect we should move on. Overseas news now. China's economic growth figures for the third quarter have been delayed. What's considered highly unusual, isn't it?
Yes, the National People's Congress is underway, we know that, and the Chinese economy is in strife. We know that, thanks to the zero COVID policy and a teetering property market. I wonder if you put those two together, maybe you've got the reason why the information was delayed. Now, China's growth rate was near zero in the 3 months to June. It's expected to bounce back to about 3% annualised for the September quarter. However, that's still well below official forecasts of around 5.5%. Anyway, extremely unusual not to release economic growth figures.
Sean, September quarter earnings season has begun on Wall Street with one of the country's biggest banks pleasantly surprising investors.
That's right. Shares in Bank of America jumped 6% after announcing stronger than expected profit. Now, that fueled speculation that US consumers are still spending. Credit card turnover at Bank of America, which is the second largest bank in the US, increased by an impressive 13% during the quarter. Now, late last week, Wells Fargo, best named bank in the world, and JP Morgan also beat expectations. Michael, this earnings season is possibly more important than most because investors have been waiting to see earnings start to fall among the big companies thanks to inflation and a higher cost of living pressures. Now, if that occurs, many analysts expect Wall Street to fall even further. So far, judging by the banks at least, it hasn't happened.
And finally, Sean, UK markets are somewhat calmer now after the government reversed almost all of Prime Minister Liz Truss's growth plans that included tax cuts.
I reckon this has to be the U-turn of all U-turns, like 6 weeks in, pin your hopes to a great new economic policy and then just dump it.
Yeah, it's a U-turn with a capital U, definitely.
Yes. I mean, I think as a result, it's probably problematic how long the Prime Minister can hold her job. Of course, we'll be talking to Latika Burke straight after the show about that exact fact. Now, the new British Chancellor Jeremy Hunt rushed out a bunch of measures yesterday or 24 hours ago, including canning changes to income tax, dividend tax, alcohol duties, and duty-free rules. Pretty much the market appreciated the news, though I think the politics isn't looking good for Ms. Truss.
I think the fact that it kind of took so long as well for those cuts to be reversed makes it feel less like a U-turn and more like either a 3-point turn or like, remember Austin Powers doing that U-turn in his little kind of golf buggy, and it was about a 60-point turn trying to get back around that. That's what it kind of feels like here. So it's not just a U-turn. It could well be Austin Powers-esque. British as well.
Nice segue.
Yeah, thank you. Anyway, stick around for that chat with Latika Burke, the Age and Sydney Morning Herald journalist based in London. It is a cracker. It is coming up next in the Fear and Greed playlist on your podcast platform or at fearandgreed.com.au. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you, Michael.
It's Wednesday, the 19th of October, 2022. Remember to hit follow and don't forget to check out our new podcast, How Do They Afford That?, featuring Canna Campbell, the founder of Sugar Mama TV, all about making your money work a little bit harder for you. A new episode out today. Today's subject is investing for your kids. I'm Michael Thompson, and that was Fear and Greed. Have a great day.